Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 83-1, I wish to table a notice of Ways and Means motion to amend the Income Tax Act, the Income Tax Act regulations, and explanatory notes. I ask that an order of the day be designated for consideration of the motion. Canadians made a choice. They chose to turn their back on the failed policies, the failed austerity policies of the past. Policies that produced stubborn unemployment and the worst decade of growth since the Great Depression. And in the things that matter most to them. Good, well-paying jobs. We've delivered real progress for the middle class and for people working hard to join the middle class. We started by asking the wealthiest to pay a little bit more so that we could lower taxes for the middle class.
These investments will remove more than 500,000 households from housing need and help cut chronic homelessness in half.
That means jobs, Mr. Speaker. Good, well-paying, middle-class jobs. Jobs that you can raise a family and build a future on.
For the average Canadian worker, wages are growing faster than inflation. If current trends continue, this year will be the strongest year of wage growth in close to a decade. Circumstances always change. In Canada's case, this has meant dealing with a new administration in the United States. This has posed, shall I say, some interesting challenges. One of the most important things we have achieved since the last fall economic statement is the renegotiation of the North American Free Trade Agreement.
This was important for the millions of Canadians whose jobs rely on North American trade. And also important for Canadian businesses who told us time and time again that the most meaningful thing we could do to ensure stability and confidence in Canada's economy would be to successfully renegotiate NAFTA. Mr. Speaker, that's exactly what we did. We were able to stand our ground because we stood on those people's shoulders.
The European Trade Commissioner, Cecilia Malmström, and I call each other sisters in trade. We sign our emails hugs. We
Really?
sometimes
You actually do that?
Yes, we do.
Wow.
We sometimes send each other smiley faces in particularly difficult moments.
But, Mr. Speaker, just because we share a trade agreement with the United States doesn't mean we'll always agree with their approach. The current administration has moved forward with an aggressive package of tax cuts for large corporations. That's their right as a sovereign nation. Some on the right have lobbied us to match those measures. If we were to do that, it would add tens of billions of dollars in new debt, Mr. Speaker.
I mean, come on, people.
I said, I mean, could.
Uh-oh, retard alert! Retard alert!
Mr. Speaker, let's be blunt. Managing a federal budget calls for some tough choices. And the fact is, Mr. Speaker, when the members opposite push for an aggressive elimination of the deficit, what they really mean are aggressive cuts in services, cuts that will make life harder for people and for families.
And so we choose a different path. One that makes it clear to businesses that if they have a choice to invest on either side of the border, Canada is the smart and sensible choice. There are challenges all around us.
Challenges that range from uncertainty about the global economy to concerns about lingering trade disputes to the challenges facing the oil and gas sector in Alberta, which is contending today with very low crude oil prices.
In 2016, our government worked with provinces and territories in consultation with Indigenous peoples to reach Canada's first ever National Clean Growth and Climate Action Plan. It is a comprehensive plan that invests in public transit, phases out coal power, invests in clean energy, prices pollution, and supports energy efficiency across Canada.
Mr. Speaker, Conservative politicians here in the House and in some provincial capitals want to bury their heads in the sand and ignore what's happening to the climate and to the economy. They want to make pollution free again and let our kids and our grandkids deal with the consequences.
Will you unveil a plan that will actually meet the Paris targets?
Of course I will unveil a plan that reaches the targets that we have already voted in favor of. We believe that Canada has to be part of the solution. We want to have, we will have a meaningful plan to reduce emissions, and that will also tackle other major environmental issues.
After 3 years of strong action, Canada is now poised to lead and succeed in the global clean growth economy, an opportunity that's estimated to be worth $26 trillion in the next dozen years. We need to make a cleaner economy more affordable for middle-class Canadians. That's why our government will not keep any of the revenues from pricing pollution. We'll return every single penny to provinces and territories where we collect it, and 80% of Canadian families will be better off as a result. To encourage businesses to invest in their own growth and create more good, well-paying jobs, our government proposes to allow businesses to immediately write off for tax purposes the full cost of machinery and equipment used in the manufacturing and processing of goods. We will also allow specified clean energy equipment to be eligible for an immediate write-off of the full cost. This will help achieve climate goals and boost Canada's global competitiveness. And in response to requests from the business community, we're also introducing a new accelerated investment incentive, an accelerated capital cost allowance for businesses of all sizes and across all sectors of the economy. This incentive will encourage more businesses to invest in assets that will drive business growth over the long term, setting the stage for more good middle-class jobs across our country. The current administration has moved forward with an aggressive package of tax cuts for large corporations. Some on the right have lobbied us to match those measures. If we were to do that, it would add tens of billions of dollars in new debt, Mr. Speaker. We're in a good position. Obviously, when unemployment rates are at or near 40-year lows, that's positive. We've seen some very significant investments. Most recently, the significant investment by LNG Canada, largest single investment in Canadian history by a private investor. So Canada is a place where people want to make investments.
And because our economy is doing so well, we also have the fiscal room to continue to follow through on the commitments we made to all Canadians.
Mr. Speaker, what these and the other measures contained in the Fall Economic Statement all have in common is this. They're all part of our government's plan to follow through on the commitments that we made to Canadians, to strengthen and grow the middle class, and offer real help to people working hard to join it, to grow the economy and invest in the middle class, to give Canadians the help that they need to succeed, making smart investments to grow the economy for the long term while we bring the books back towards balance.
And the budget will balance itself.
In what year will the budget be balanced?
As we've shown each year, we've shown the ongoing trajectory to be fiscally responsible by reducing the amount of debt to our GDP over time.
In what year will the budget be balanced?
As I've said, we think it's important to be fiscally responsible and to have a balanced approach to managing our economy. And that is exactly the approach we've taken. Happily, it's working with a high level of growth, and it's showing that we can make investments in our long-term future and do it in a fiscally responsible way.
And in what year will the budget be balanced?
And as I've said, the approach that we've taken is one that has demonstrably worked.
When you have modest growth, we have modest growth this year, we will have modest growth, you don't return the country into deficit. And Trudeau's deficits will not be small. Mr. Trudeau has made tens of billions of dollars of spending promises. He said the budget will balance itself. He has no idea what he is talking about when it comes to these things. That's why you could be sure that his small deficits will become large deficits and would get Canada into the same pickle of high taxes and program cuts that we had under the last Liberal government.
That's what Canadians expect of us. That is what we promised. And that is, Mr. Speaker, exactly what we're doing. Thank you very much.
In terms of fundraising, the federal government will allow non-profit journalist organizations that produce a wide variety of news and information of interest to Canadians to get charitable status and issue official receipts to donors. This is also a dangerous precedent. So we're going to make, as I've said above, we're going to pick which organizations qualify. We're going to pick media and ideological winners and losers, and we're also going to allow them to become nonprofits and obtain charitable status. So you're going to have the organs of the state be registered as charities, exempting them from many of our tax laws for businesses to be able to more freely push the ideological narrative of choice that their own so-called independent panel decides is appropriate. For instance, in my community, there's two people that I know of who cover local news and publish it online, and they have a very small following. But they do it out of the kindness of their heart. They sacrifice all their time because all the local papers have already been closed down. How did this happen? First, the local newspapers were swallowed up by the conglomerates, whether it's Post Media or anybody else. They were all bought up. Then they were downsized or amalgamated, and then they were eliminated entirely. There used to be 4 or 5 print editions in my area. Now there is one, and it is owned by a conglomerate. So the conglomerate media companies themselves are responsible for the dwindling journalism that happens at a local level. And here they are saying it's a serious threat to our democracy. And how do they propose to deal with it? By the taxpayer, giving them a pile of money to enrich their mega corporations.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the finance minister has demonstrated that he can do two things at one time. He can give a speech while adding almost $1 million to our national debt in the same half hour. Congratulations, Mr. Speaker, to the minister, and we know that Canadians will get the bill for that new debt. Now, our government has told us, under the leadership of this Prime Minister, that budgets balance themselves. He predicted that this self-balancing budget would manifest in the year 2019, barely a month from today. Today, the Finance Minister has presented a fiscal update in which the deficit is 3 times the size the Liberal Party promised in the last election, and in which the deficit will not only be in place next year when it was promised to be gone, it will actually be bigger than it is right now. In fact, this economic update reports that the deficits for the next 5 years will all be larger than they projected just 6 months ago in the 2018 budget. We have, like most Canadians, we have come to accept that these Liberals never take responsibility for anything. Exactly. But what is startling about this particular statement is that they just go on doing more and more damage to the fiscal situation of this country without any concern or hesitation. These two gentlemen of great privilege have inherited enormous fortune, balanced budgets from the previous government, they inherited booming U.S. and world economies, a roaring housing sector in Vancouver and Toronto, which has poured more revenue into government coffers, record low interest rates, which makes debt more affordable temporarily. Now, all of these factors are out of the government's control, but have, through the goddess Fortuna, rained money on this government. $20 billion of additional revenue. I'm pleased to report to the House, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister took that $20 billion and did the responsible thing. He put it against our national debt. He saved it up for a rainy day. He reinforced our foundation against forthcoming storms. Kidding! He blew every single penny of it, and it wasn't enough. On top of that windfall, he had to spend $20 billion more. If a crisis of any kind, another international financial recession, a massive concern, a massive problem with international security, a natural disaster, or any other such kind of difficulty led to the compression of the denominator, well, then we would face a crisis in the nation's finances. And in that crisis, the Liberal government, if it were to keep its promise, something that none of us believe it would ever consider doing, but they would then be in a position where they would have to raise taxes or cut spending at the time when the economy most needs the opposite. In other words, they are putting our future in a reckless state of danger by spending our tomorrow on their today. We all know that debt today means higher taxes tomorrow. The Parliamentary Budget Officer has indicated that the cost of borrowing for the Government of Canada will rise by 2/3 to almost $40 billion over the next 4 or 5 years. That is almost as much as we transfer to the provinces to fund our entire health care transfer, Mr. Speaker. And in today's update, the government admits that the cost of borrowing is going up, and I quote, for the first half year, the increase in the borrowing cost has been 14.3%. That is the combined result of growing deficits and higher interest rates. In other words, Mr. Speaker, there will, at this pace, be a massive wealth transfer from working-class Canadians who will pay higher taxes so that wealthy bondholders and bankers can collect more interest. Even socialist economists recognize that interest on national debt represents a wealth transfer from the working class to the wealthy, because those who own bonds are those who can afford to buy them. You can't lend money if you don't have money. And so those with money benefit when governments go out and borrow. And once again, we see the government instead of favoring the have-nots, they once again favor the have-yachts. Mr. Speaker, we were told that this economic update was going to respond to the attempt by the U.S. President to take our money, business, and jobs. And so far, the Prime Minister has been prepared to help the President in all of those objectives. His carbon tax, his decision to block pipelines, his massive regulatory state, which prevents businesses from functioning here in Canada, has driven money out of our country. Canadian investment in the U.S. is up 2/3, and U.S. investment in Canada is down by half. And when money leaves, jobs leave. The Business Council of Canada says that the result of this imbalance could lead to 500,000 jobs lost in this country. And what is the government's response to that? Well, they tell us they're going to be bringing forward something called the Centre for Regulatory Innovation. Now, I think most people who've dealt with the red tape this government has put forward, the last thing they want to see is more regulatory innovation, because so far, that regulatory innovation has meant blocking the Northern Gateway pipeline. They came up with innovative ways to make it impossible for TransCanada to build the Energy East pipeline. And of course, their most innovative stroke of genius has been to drive Kinder Morgan out of this country by giving them $4 billion of Canadian tax money in order to buy a 65-year-old pipeline that we already had, money that Texas oil company is now using to build pipelines in the United States of America. When this Prime Minister took office, 3 of the world's most respected pipeline companies were ready to put shovels in the ground. Kinder Morgan was going to build Trans Mountain. Enbridge was going to build Northern Gateway. And TransCanada was going to build Energy East. They had the financial commitments, the applications in, and they were ready to go. And all 3 of those companies have now left. Mr. Speaker, that is the plan that they have to unwind the massive regulatory obstacles that have driven our oil, our money, our businesses, and our jobs right into the arms of Donald Trump. And nothing in this announcement today will reverse that direction. In fact, this government has backed down on NAFTA, giving President Trump everything he asked for and getting nothing in return that we did not already have. Mr. Speaker, I know how painful it is for them to hear the truth, the painful truth that they from which they have for so long tried to turn away their eyes. But unfortunately, they have to face up to the fact that they shattered their promise to balance the budget next year, that they have built up massive new debt, not only for future generations, but for present-day Canadians, that the cost of government is driving up the cost of living, and that is leading to a serious crunch on the backs of everyday Canadians, Canadians who know what it's like to live within their means.